Don'ts. Pointed profanity by either title or lip. This includes the words God, Lord, Jesus, Christ, unless they be used reverently in connection with proper religious ceremonies. Hell, S-O-B, God, and every other profane and vulgar expression, however it may be spelled. Any licentious or suggestive nudity, in fact or in silhouette, and any lecherous or licentious notice thereof by other characters in the picture. The illegal traffic in drugs, any inference of sex perversion, white slavery. This actually apparently means human or sex trafficking of women or children. Miscegenation, i.e. interracial marriage or childbearing. Sex hygiene and venereal diseases. Scenes of actual childbirth, in fact or in silhouette. Children's sex organs. Ridicule of the clergy. Willful offense to any nation, race, or creed. Be carefuls. The use of the flag. International relations. Avoid picturing in an unfavorable light another country's religion, history, institutions, prominent people, and citizenry. Arson. The use of firearms. Theft, robbery, safecracking, and dynamiting of trains, mines, buildings, etc., having in mind the effect which a too detailed description of these may have upon the moron. Brutality and possible gruesomeness. Technique of committing murder by whatever method. Methods of smuggling. Third-degree methods. I assume this means interrogations. Actual hangings or electrocutions as legal punishment for crime. Sympathy for criminals. Attitude toward public characters and institutions. Sedition. Apparent cruelty to children and animals. Branding of people or animals. The sale of women or of a woman selling her virtue. Rape or attempted rape. First night scenes, as in the consummation of marriage. Man and woman in bed together. Deliberate seduction of girls. The institution of marriage. Surgical operations. The use of drugs. Titles or scenes having to do with law enforcement or law enforcing officers. Excessive or lustful kissing, particularly when one character or the other is a heavy, which I believe means criminal. Everything that I just listed off was part of the Hays Code, which was a set of industry guidelines for the self-censorship of film content, beginning officially in 1934. What led to these stringent, prudish, and devout guidelines enforced on all of Hollywood for over 30 years? By 1922, the pressure from numerous religious, civic, and political organizations following several Hollywood scandals was intensely felt by the major studios. Legislators in 37 states had introduced hundreds of movie censorship bills the previous year, 1921. Studios knew it would be too difficult to follow these inconsistent decency laws that were cropping up across the country, and one scandal in particular had brought it all bearing down upon the industry. March 24th, 1887, in Smith Center, Kansas, a baby weighing somewhere around or above 16 pounds is born to parents Mary E. Gordon and William Goodrich Arbuckle. William thought this baby was an illegitimate child. He and Mary were kind of slim, and he did not feel that such a large child could possibly belong to them. Their other 8 children were not this large. So William named this baby after a senator that he despised, who was rumored, probably accurately, to be a philanderer, Roscoe Conkling. In 1888, the Arbuckle family relocated to Santa Ana, California, and they opened a small hotel. And in 1895, at the age of 8, young Roscoe Arbuckle begins a life of stage performance with Frank Bacon's traveling theater troupe. He was also said to feel more at home in the spotlight, where he was not being bullied for his size. And it was sometime in his childhood that he earned the nickname Fatty Arbuckle. Unfortunately, Roscoe's birth had been so physically traumatic for his mother that she developed chronic health issues that led to her death when Roscoe was 11 years old. His father, who already felt like he was an illegitimate son, blamed him for this and refused to support Roscoe. He vanished, and Roscoe was taken in by a local hotel owner, where he then worked and was tutored by a teacher who lived in the hotel. He also continued performing at the local vaudeville theater on amateur nights. In 1902, Roscoe is reunited with his father and his new wife in Santa Clara, California, and his father at that point owned a restaurant, and Roscoe earned his keep by waiting tables. He began working again in vaudeville and burlesque shows in California and the Pacific Northwest. In 1904, he sings in San Francisco's Unique Theater for Sid Groman, and later joins the Pantages Theater Group. In 1906, he plays the Orpheum Theater in Portland, Oregon, in a vaudeville troupe organized by Leon Errol. In 1908, he meets singer and dancer Araminta Estelle Durfee, or Minta Durfee, and they get married on August 6th of that same year and continue touring vaudeville until leaving on a tour for the Roscoe Burbank Stock Vaudeville Company in China and Japan, and they return in 1909. By July of 1909, he begins his career in film, joining the Selig Polyscope Company. I don't remember Selig's first name. And he appears in a one-reel short called Ben's Kid. He continues to periodically appear in Selig one-reelers until April of 1913, when he signs with the Keystone Film Company run by Mack Sennett, immortalized in the musical Mack and Mabel, about his relationship with Mabel Normand. In 1914, Paramount Pictures offers Roscoe $1,000 a day plus 25% of all profits of his projects with co-star Mabel Normand. And that's unheard of. This is huge money. Roscoe is making bank. He also has complete artistic control of all of his projects with Mabel Normand, which was also kind of unusual, to say the least. In 1916, Roscoe helps found and joins the East Coast-based group, let me see if I can say this correctly, Comic Film Corporation, Comic, that is in something of a bid to gain more artistic control. Generally, when actors back then would start their own companies, it was because they were straight up sick of being totally controlled by the studios. Because if you had a contract with a studio, they owned you. At this point, in 1916, Roscoe Arbuckle has an annual income of over $1 million, making him the highest earning actor in Hollywood. A heavyweight in more ways than one. In March, this is just a random side note, Roscoe is in New York and he is introduced by a mutual friend, Lou Anger, to a man named Buster Keaton. This friendship launched Buster Keaton's career. They appeared in movies together. But then, later that year, in October, Roscoe has his first brush with scandal. He attends a banquet in Boston. So Roscoe goes to this banquet, everything's fine and dandy. When it gets done, he is tired and he wants to retire to his hotel room, which is exactly what he does, according to multiple reports as far as the people who were actually there. So he goes back to his hotel room to rest. But then the rest of the party, now you have to remember, this is 1917. Partying is really, no, you don't do that unless you're a scumbag. That's it. You either don't party or you're a scumbag. So he attends the banquet, he goes back to his hotel, and everybody else leaves to go to a brothel called Brownie Kennedy's Roadhouse in nearby Woburn, Massachusetts. And they proceed to have what has been described as an orgy. Yeah, they did that. Somehow the news gets out about it, and the brothel is raided. The madam is arrested, but she gets out after paying a fine. But you know, this is not good, okay? We don't want this stuff getting out, right? e.l.f. Zucker, the studio head for Paramount Pictures, was present at the orgy. He's there, okay? And he doesn't want it getting out that he's there, or was there. He gets blackmailed essentially by whoever is in possession of this news. It does get out a little bit that it happened, but not all the details come out. So in order to keep his name out of the papers, e.l.f. Zucker pays $100,000 in blackmail bribes. I'm sorry, lots of color correcting happening today. So people knew he had gone to the banquet. It just started getting spread around that he had also been at this orgy, which he was not, and e.l.f. Zucker doesn't care. He pays the bribes to keep his own name out. Nobody corrects the record about Fatty. But because the story was mostly kept under wraps, it didn't really affect his career, and things were still going really good for him. He returns to Hollywood, but he returns without his wife. They are estranged at this point, and she remains in New York. And then in 1918, he signs a 3-year, $3 million contract with Adolf Zucker's Paramount Pictures. So, $3 million, which is currently the equivalent of about $52 million, like over $52 million today. That's a lot of money for a 3-year contract. Like, not bad, especially since, you know, the film industry was really just getting going by this point. Fatty brought in the crowds. People loved him. He was a large man, but he was very agile and therefore great at the physical comedy. The gags were often about his weight, but he would dance and do a lot of kind of intense physical comedy that you wouldn't expect a man of his size to be able to do. And so everybody loved him. He used Fatty as a character name, but he would not like it if you used it for him in person. His fan base went all in on the nicknames and would call him the Prince of Wales and the Balloonatic, which That one's pretty clever. I like the balloonatic. In 1921, it's the end of the 3-year contract, and his schedule is really catching up to him. He is making full-length films by this time, and by the time Labor Day weekend rolls around, he is more than ready for a vacation. So his plan is to take his uber fancy car, a special ordered Pierce Arrow Model 66A4, to San Francisco. Now, Paramount head Zucker wanted him to stay for a convention, but Roscoe didn't care. He did not care. He wanted a vacation, so he left. He takes off in his fancy car to San Francisco, where he is going to have some R&R, and he is joined kind of last minute by his friend, film director Fred Fishback. And then they're also joined by actor Lowell Sherman. And they leave on September 3rd in 1921. And I'm pretty sure they make it that day. The St. Francis Hotel. And Fatty takes 3 adjoining hotel rooms, suites, on the 12th floor. So 1219, 1220, and 1221, pretty sure. Or maybe 1217, if they're all odds. Whatever. Anyway, 3 adjoining suites. 2 of the rooms were definitely 1219 and 1221. This comes up later. So this is Labor Day weekend. They left on Saturday the 3rd, and then on Labor Day itself, Fred insists on having a party. And Roscoe's not really into it, but he's like, yeah, what the heck. Let's do it. Let's have a party, whatever. And it is Prohibition time, so alcohol is not legal. But there's definitely booze at the party. The party starts kicking off, and about 24 people show up. And among these 24 people are 3 that came together, 2 of which Roscoe's not happy about their presence. And these 3 people are Bambina Maud Delmont, Al Semnacher, or Knacker, Semnacher, I don't know, and Virginia Rapay. The 2 that, oh Lord, I need to stop hunching so you can't see my face. The 2 that Fatty is not happy about showing up are the 2 women, Maud and Virginia. His reason for not being happy with their showing up is that they had a bit of a reputation, and he was worried that police would be tipped off to a party by their presence. Like, they were known to party, and obviously it's Prohibition time, so it's illegal, and he was not in the mood to get raided on his vacation. So they're just there, and he's not happy about it, so whatever. So let's talk a little bit about Virginia Rapay. She was a young actress, and she had been born Virginia Rapp on July 7th of 1895 in New York to mother Mabel Rapp, who was a chorus girl, and an unknown father. Just like Fatty, her mother also dies when she's 11 years old, and she's then raised by her grandmother. And at the age of 14, she begins modeling in department stores, and by that point she had already added the inflected E to her name to make it Rapay. In 1916, she moved to San Francisco and became engaged, but tragically her fiancé was killed in a car accident, and then she moved to LA to work in films, and by 1920 she was engaged to and living with Henry Lehrman. She was listed on the census at the time as his boarder, but they were engaged. And then by the time of the party in 1921, she had already appeared in several films, including with what's his name? Rudolph Valentino. And she had a promising career ahead of her as an actress and a trailblazing fashion icon. Back at the party, so we're back on Labor Day, 1921. Fred Fishbach has abruptly left the event that he had planned, and Maud Delmont is allegedly stowed away in a bathroom with Lowell Sherman, doing who knows what for possibly an hour, according to some reports. By this time, everyone has consumed copious amounts of alcohol and is enjoying the music and dancing. They're having a good time. It's a party. Now, who was where and with whom and when is still hotly debated to this day. But what we do know is that Virginia Rapet then had some kind of medical emergency in none other than Fatty Arbuckle's suite. And Maud Delmont entered the room at some point during this medical emergency to find her either on the floor or Fatty's bed, barely clothed and writhing in pain. Arbuckle was heard by several people to have said, "Shut up or I'll throw her out the window." At some point, not very far in all of this, Rapet was examined by a doctor in a different hotel room. She was moved to a different hotel room, and Arbuckle paid for the room she was in. And then the next day, Fatty was under the impression that she was going to recover and that everything was fine. So he left. He paid everybody's expenses, for the most part, and scooted out of there. He paid, at least I believe, for the guests that he had actually invited, and then for the hotel room that Virginia was in, and then he left. But 3 days later, Virginia has been languishing with no improvement. She is moved to the private institution, the Wakefield Sanatorium, and the day after, she passes away in the afternoon of September 9th. Her dear, dear friend Maud takes herself straight away to the police station to charge Fatty Arbuckle with the rape and murder of Virginia. Fatty had just learned of her passing and elected to return to San Francisco, where he is arrested on Maud's charge to his surprise. Arbuckle's initial story to police was that Virginia had become hysterical at the party, just kind of openly hysterical, and was tearing off her clothes, saying that she couldn't breathe, all these crazy things, and that she seemed to be in pain, and so he helped her to his bed and tried to calm her. And Maud told Roscoe to leave the room, and at some point in this time frame of Maud yelling at Roscoe to leave was supposedly when he had said, "Shut up or I'll throw her out the window." I'm getting the feeling he doesn't like this Maud character very much. How about you? He did supposedly leave the room though, and in this version of events, he's never really alone with Virginia. She had become hysterical in the middle of the party. He helps her to his room, but everyone is aware of what is going on, so he's not really alone with her at any point. Maud's version of the story is completely different. Feature that. And this is how it goes. Supposedly, Roscoe had muscled Virginia into his room, saying, "I've waited 5 years for you," which sounds pretty creepy. The time frame supposedly that they were in the room alone in Maud's story was anywhere between 5 minutes to an hour. I couldn't really get much information on that specific tidbit, but Maud heard screams in the room, so she was banging on the door and kicking on the door, and finally Roscoe opens it and he's wearing Virginia's hat and smiling this creepy, goofy grin, and behind him, either on the bed or the floor, was Virginia, barely dressed, and supposedly she yells, "I'm dying! He killed me!" or he did it. There's a few different versions of what she supposedly said, but basically accuses Roscoe of harming her. In both of the stories, a doctor was called soon after, and Roscoe had returned to the other guests, left the room, and from what I can tell of all of the accounts, it seemed like everybody kind of thought she was gonna recover just by the way they behaved. Now, some more recent articles and research that people have done mention an illegal medical examination where they removed her internal organs and placed them in specimen jars, which prevented a proper autopsy. But none of the reports that I saw at the time mentioned that. So take that with a grain of salt, like a big one. So Fatty has been arrested and charged with the rape and murder of Virginia Rapé, and the trial is set to begin November 14th, 1921. There were testimonies, like that's how it was characterized in the papers, testimony prior to November 14th dealing with the case. The dates kind of confuse me a little bit, but it is what it is. So November 14th, 1921 is supposedly when the trial is going to start. The chief prosecutor was District Attorney Matthew Brady, a conservative attorney in San Francisco who had political aspirations and seemed more than willing to use the moral panic of the day about Hollywood to his political advantage. And the Fatty Arbuckle case was the perfect vehicle for this. Arbuckle's chief defense lawyer was Gavin McNabb, and the judge presiding over the case was named Harold Louderback, who, side note, was apparently impeached in 1933. Just throwing that out there. Right out the gate, DA Matthew Brady makes a public statement. A premature one. He said, "The evidence in my possession shows conclusively that either a rape or an attempt to rape was perpetrated on Miss Rapé by Roscoe Arbuckle. The evidence discloses beyond question that her bladder was ruptured by the weight of the body of Arbuckle, either in a rape assault or an attempt to commit rape. With this, papers across the country lit up, destroying Arbuckle in the court of public opinion. Censor boards, mayors, film exhibitor associations, and the entire states of Missouri, Pennsylvania, and Kansas banned Arbuckle films from being shown. The Anti-Saloon League, Moral Efficiency League, the Women's Vigilant Committee of San Francisco, and pastors across the country, incensed by the occurrence of a booze-filled rager and what they surely felt was only the natural result, endorsed the statement of the pastor of Hollywood's Little Church Around the Corner. The real essence of this Arbuckle matter is a general lowering of the moral standards in this country." Z. Previn, also went by Prevost or Prevost. She had several names, and I think her real name was Sadie Rice, or Reese, R-E-I-S-S. She had been present at the party, and she was questioned by the DA's office from the evening of September 13th until 4:30 a.m. on the 14th, according to Arbuckle biographer David Yallop. She was not present in court on Tuesday, the 14th, but she testified on the 15th that she had walked into Roscoe's room to find Rapé writhing on the floor, saying, "He killed me, Arbuckle did it." Z later claimed that she didn't see much, that she was just repeating what Delmont had told her, and that she always felt Arbuckle to be a kind and thoughtful man. Rapé went into the bedroom with Roscoe Arbuckle because she wanted to. That's all I have to say. Alice Blake, another woman who was present at the party, was apparently also questioned by the DA's office in the same manner, so way too long, and somewhat abusively apparently. She corroborated Previn's initial statement of Roscoe's guilt. Al Semnacher, Rapé's manager and friend to Delmont, and rumored to have been a lover to both of them, but I didn't find anything to support that. I don't know. He also could not seem to keep his story straight. He first testified to the prosecution's questioning that Arbuckle had been alone with Rapé, but later said Arbuckle was never alone with her. September 14th, 1921, the Oakland Tribune reported that Maud Delmont had berated Al Semnacher for not bringing Virginia's aunt to San Francisco with him when he came back, but he argued that he had left the area too early in the morning to do so, like 4 a.m. And then she asked him what she was supposed to do about her fees at the St. Francis Hotel where everything had happened, totaling up to $250 of expenses. She implied that he should pay them for her, and he was like, nah. He made some comment of like she should hawk her handbag, at which point she smacked him across the face with said handbag in the courthouse foyer. Real smart. The paper that same day, September 14th, also reported that 2 medical examiners, Dr. Shelby Strange and Dr. William Ophuls, O-P-H-U-L-S, who performed the autopsy, both testified in the coroner's jury. Wow. I almost said jury. Ophuls testified that he found only 2 bruises on Virginia's body. Strange testified of bruises on all 4 limbs and claimed them to be caused by human agency. If you Google Virginia Rapé on like images, you can find morgue pictures of her, which I wasn't expecting. So I kind of happened upon them accidentally. But there are some bruises on one of her arms, and then there's a few bruises on her leg. I really don't know that I would say they're definite signs of violence. I don't know. And she had been reported to have been writhing around somewhat violently because she was in so much pain apparently. That was debated to have been or not been caused by Arbuckle because her bladder ruptured. So if if she's suffering from that, she's going to be throwing herself around in so much pain and perhaps got bruises that way. Because remember, she didn't pass away until 4 days afterward. So I'm not saying anything for sure, but I just feel like the amount of bruising to me was kind of, and they are not the best photographs, so perhaps the bruises appeared worse in person. Ophuls followed up his statement saying he believed only violence of some force could have caused the injury of peritonitis and the bladder rupture, and when asked to elaborate on what kind of force, he said finger pressure. I feel like that implies, cover your ears, children, digital penetration. But that's not laid out fully in the testimony. He said finger pressure. That's the words he used. On September 15th, the Oakland Tribune reported that Fatty seemed sullen and morose, disappointed that the coroner's jury did not totally exonerate him. Experts were assigned to diagram the rooms at the St. Francis Hotel with complete measurements and photographs taken of all the furnishings. I could only find pictures of room 1221. The room Rapé had been in was 1219. The San Francisco Police Sergeant Dolan had already taken photographs of the door to Arbuckle's room, which Arbuckle allegedly locked. At some point he admitted to doing so, but I don't recall when it was that he admitted that. But there were marks in the door that Dolan described as having been made by the toe of a woman. I really don't know how you'd come to that conclusion about the toe. Maybe it was on the, it doesn't say if it's on the outside or the inside of the door, because Maud had said she kicked at the door, so maybe it was from Maud kicking at the door? I don't know. Rappe's clothing was collected as exhibits for the trial, with the exception of 1 or 2 pieces. The police captain Matheson was to question several people who had been at the hotel and in the rooms in the days leading up to the party. Now, there was jury selection going on. The defense team and the prosecution are trying to kind of figure out the cases that they're going to make. And the defense had 14 witnesses to support Arbuckle's innocence. The prosecution had 3: Alice Blake, Z. Previn, and Maud Delmont. It was accurately predicted in the September 15th article in the Oakland Tribune. It was accurately predicted that the rape and murder charges would be dropped and downgraded to manslaughter, and Arbuckle was then released on bail. He couldn't be released while he was still charged with murder, but because the charge for the trial was downgraded, he was able to be released on bail. The judge stated, in defense of the manslaughter charge, "I did not find any evidence that Mr. Arbuckle either committed or attempted to commit rape. The court has been presented with the merest outline. The district attorney has presented barely enough facts to justify my holding the defendant on the charge which is here filed against him. But we are not trying Roscoe Arbuckle alone. We are not trying the screen celebrity who has given joy and pleasure to the entire world. We are actually, gentlemen, in a large sense, trying ourselves. We are trying our present-day morals, our present-day social conditions, our present-day looseness of thought and lack of social balance. The issue here is really and truly larger than the guilt or innocence of this poor, unfortunate man. The issue here is universal and grows out of conditions which are a matter of comment and notoriety and apprehension to every true lover and protector of our American institutions. I have decided to make a holding on the ground of manslaughter." The chief medical examiner also made a public statement. "The post-mortem examination showed a ruptured bladder, the rupture being due to natural causes. There were no marks of violence upon the body. There was absolutely no evidence of a criminal assault, no signs that the girl had been attacked in any way." Oakland Tribune, September 27th. Z. Previn now testifies that Delmont had a good many drinks of gin, whiskey, and other things, and says Semnacher had not been in the room with them when Rappe was found, as he had claimed. On the same day, the Olean Evening Times of Olean, New York, reported that Semnacher planned to sue Fatty's attorney Dominguez for character defamation on the question of a gold mesh bag supposedly belonging to Rappe in his possession. He argued there were 2 such bags, one given to him by another woman for safekeeping, which he had forgotten about and was therefore in his pocket at the party, and then Rappe's that Arbuckle had given him at the party, presumably after her emergency, and then was returned by him to Rappe before she died. Prior to the lawsuit, it was discovered in the possession of Delmont. Jury selection soon began. Defense attorney McNabb said to Assistant DA Uren, it's U''Ren, Uren? I don't know. On a question to one prospective juror, this was McNabb saying this, on the 14th of November, the defense will not put the reputation of the dead girl on trial. He further explained that if the defense introduced medical evidence that Miss Rappe had died from a bladder rupture, and that the organ was in such a condition that it might have ruptured at any time, even had she not gone to Fatty's jollification, that's his word, that this must be taken as purely a medical fact and not an attack on Miss Rappe. It was later discovered that on that very same day, the 14th of November, the first day of the trial, that a mysterious payment is made to D.A. Brady, the prosecution, by Adolf Zucker, the studio head of Paramount. It has been theorized that the party was a setup to gain blackmail material on Arbuckle so that Zucker would have more control over his career and his ability to rake in the dough, and that it simply spiraled out of control. Fred Fishback, who planned and then disappeared at the beginning of the party, is also suspected to have been in on this plot by Zucker, but this theory has never been proven. But also, what are you paying the DA for, Zucker? Are you paying him to let him go? Because I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know. All in all, the trial was a complete circus. Every story contradicted, and the witnesses couldn't seem to stick to their own stories. Arbuckle himself changed his story. He first had claimed that she went into hysterics in the midst of the party, but once the trial began, he claimed to have found her in his bathroom, vomiting or about to vomit, and then, like his prior story, he supposedly helped her to his bed, yada yada. So once the trial began, Roscoe changes his story to this, but it did remain that for the rest of the trial. At some point in the trial, it was discovered that Maud Delmont had taken the time to telegraph two attorney friends in San Diego and LA, while her beloved friend, or acquaintance of a few days, she could never seem to figure out how long she had known Virginia, was apparently dying on a hotel floor. Imagine this. Your beloved friend is supposedly dying and you send a telegram. Not to a doctor, not to her family, like, Virginia's dying. No, none of that. This is what her telegram read. The identical telegrams that she sent to her attorney friends. We have Roscoe Arbuckle in a hole here. Chance to make some money out of him. What's that? Miss Maud also seemed to be well known to California police, with over 50 counts filed against her for extortion, fraud, and racketeering. She was known as Madam Black, a professional correspondent for blackmailers who would procure young women to go to the parties of the rich and famous and put wealthy men into compromising situations in order to extort money out of them. She would also supposedly pose in divorce cases as the other woman to extort money out of men in the middle of divorces. Like, he cheated, I can prove it, because he cheated with me. Maud. So due to this information, D.A. Brady refused to ever put her on the witness stand. His star witness, the source of all of his information, he never called her up to the witness stand. She was named as an official witness for the prosecution, but nope. Lowell Sherman, who was alleged to have been alone in a room with Delmont for an undisclosed amount of time while the stuff happening between Arbuckle and Rapé was going on, testified, I cannot say that she, Virginia, screamed because I did not hear any scream. She used no words that were distinct. It was just sort of a mumbling and groaning. According to the Indianapolis Star on November 26, a Dr. Shiles testifies that a bumpy train ride could have ruptured an overdistended bladder, which was supposedly her condition. And then a man named Harry Barker, who supposedly knew Rapé for 5 years prior, claimed that he had seen her multiple times at parties, doubled over in pain and tearing at her clothes, and claiming not to be able to breathe, which is what Arbuckle said happened at his party. And that she seemed to suffer from even the smallest amount of wine. On December 3rd, it was reported in the Sheboygan Press that a Mrs. Fox, witness for the prosecution and acquaintance of Rapé, claims she had never seen signs of illness in Rapé. Alice Blake testifies for the jury that I did not see Mr. Arbuckle go into the room or come out of the room, contradicting her previous testimony. Previn claimed in excerpts from her testimony to the grand jury that she was threatened by the DA with imprisonment if she did not say that Miss Rapé had exclaimed after being injured, "He killed me." The medical professionals all contradicted one another on the cause of the rupture, but the consensus was that Rapé had died of a ruptured bladder and secondary peritonitis. Peritonitis is inflammation of the peritoneum, or the lining of the inner wall of the abdomen and cover of the abdominal organs. She was also said to have suffered from cystitis, a type of UTI specific to the bladder, so inflammation of the bladder. Testimony from different sources and the newspapers claimed that Rapé had 5 abortions in the years between age 16 and the time of her death. I really don't know about that. I don't know. But if true, it could have weakened stuff down there. Some reports supposedly that she was overheard at the party asking Arbuckle for money for another abortion. I don't know. I didn't see anything in the medical reports that she was pregnant at the time of her death, but it was also claimed by other acquaintances that she was known to have bouts of illness and abdominal pain after the consumption of alcohol. The symptoms of peritonitis are severe pain, swelling of the abdomen, fever, weight loss, acute respiratory distress syndrome, and in some cases, shock. Some who have looked into the case say that there's no way that a bladder can spontaneously rupture. However, medical research today says otherwise. If one suffers from chronic inflammation or consistently consumes a great deal of alcohol or suffers from urinary retention, which can be caused by a UTI or cystitis, the bladder may rupture. She had 3 symptoms that cause bladder rupture. Generally, if a bladder ruptures, it's caused by some great force, which was argued that Fatty, being a large man, attacking her. But some of the doctors said there were not enough signs of violence on her body to support that, and there was no sign that she had been raped. The doctor who treated Rapé at the hotel testified that she said that Arbuckle did not try to sexually assault her. That's what the doctor said. But the DA got this dismissed as hearsay, which I guess kind of is, but so is literally every other bit of evidence. The nurse who treated Rapé at the sanitarium testified that Rapé told her that she had been suffering of internal pain up to 6 weeks prior. The attorneys for the defense got several witnesses for the prosecution, including Z. Previn, to admit that the DA had threatened them into testifying. It was also reported on December 3rd that as the jury for the Arbuckle case deliberated, that Delmont had just been arrested on the charge of bigamy from Madera County and was in jail on default of her bail. The bigamy charge was because whichever marriage she was on, she had been married multiple times by this point. The divorce wasn't finalized. She remarried, so she was arrested on a bigamy charge. They had sat on her warrant during the Arbuckle trial in case she was ever called to the stand, which she was not. By the 3rd, she had been on hunger strike for about 14 hours, and she bemoaned her bad luck. I mean, I don't know, just get your divorce finalized before you remarry, is that so hard? She said, as quoted by the article, "I have done my duty, that is all. I am still sorry for that poor child that had the life crushed out of her. I do not care what the outcome of the jury's decision is." Which seems like kind of a weird attitude to take, but okay. I guess if you don't care enough to attend to your friend while she's supposedly dying, according to yourself, so much that you're going to run off and send a telegram about it, and how you can extort money out of somebody, maybe you wouldn't also care about the verdict afterward. She is reported in the same article to have been moaning and crying that she is deserted by all. "Where are Virginia Rapé's family? Why don't they come to help me?" And, "But why didn't they let me tell my own story on the stand? Why didn't the district attorney let me testify?" Yeah, why? Why, Maud? The jury deliberated for 44 hours and came back deadlocked. 10 to acquit and 2 to convict. A Mrs. Helen Hubbard was said by the defense to have been a troublemaker. She was hostile to all of the defense testimony, at least according to defense attorney McNabb. She claimed herself to have been surprised that she was not challenged during the jury selection because she was the wife of an attorney, and some have claimed that she was friends with District Attorney Matthew Brady. I couldn't find any evidence to support it other than the fact that she was married to an attorney, and so they may have run in the same circles. But that is a conflict of interest. She said, "The entire case in the jury room was the trial of the district attorney's office rather than the trial of Arbuckle, and that she did not need to review the evidence or read the transcripts. By all accounts, she believed him to be guilty from the first and nothing would change her mind," which usually strikes somebody from being a jury member, but nobody asked her what she felt or if she had an opinion before the trial began. The other vote to convict was by a Thomas Kilkenny. Not much is said about his behavior through the trial, but conviction was not his original vote. There were rumors that different women's groups influenced the 5 female jurors, but those rumors were largely quashed, and the jurors were kept from any and all outside information as well as possible. Which is good, because the newspapers were doing the absolute most from the time Rapé died to the time jury deadlocked on December 4th, 1921. Now about those newspapers, William Randolph Hearst had been discovered somewhat recently at this point to be in an affair with the actress Marion Davies. An affair that began when she was 19 and he was 53. She was performing for the Ziegfeld Follies in 1916, and that's when they met and she became his mistress. Now because of this, he was willing to use any scandal to distract from his own indiscretions, and being a newspaper magnate, he had the power to curate public opinion. He was quoted to have bragged that the Arbuckle scandal sold more papers than the sinking of the Lusitania, and pretty much all of World War I. With a hung jury, they were able to try Arbuckle yet again. D.A. Brady was determined to get his conviction. And he nearly did. Nearly. The defense team thought that using transcripts of Arbuckle's original courthouse testimony would be enough, as he had been effective in arguing his innocence. Throughout the trial, his story stayed the same. He was cool, calm, and collected, seemed rational and kind, all of the things that you want when you're trying to prove your innocence. His defense team was wrong, however. Reading his testimony with zero emotion made him seem cold and unaffected. The second trial lasted from January 11th to February 3rd of 1922, and the jury of 11 men and 1 woman came back 10 to convict and 2 to acquit. It was time for a third trial. Arbuckle had spent over $700,000 for his defense, and with his films universally banned and not having any new projects, obviously, he had no income. He sold many of his things, but he was pretty much out of money. He had gone from the highest paid actor ever to being almost penniless, besides the fact that pretty much the entire country hated his guts. Up to this point, leading up to the third trial, he had prevented as much witness testimony that he could that would be damaging to Rapé's reputation. Her medical conditions were somewhat understood, but her having any kind of past or being of loose morals had only been talk in the papers. It was said by some in the film industry that she was a studio hanger-on, like a clout chaser, you might say, today. Supposedly at one point she had mites so bad that one of the studio buildings had to be fumigated. I have no idea if that's true. Witnesses on the stand testified that they knew Rap to be promiscuous and would often disrobe at parties, suffering from abdominal attacks when she drank heavily, which she allegedly did often. She was kind of a partier. So in the third trial, Roscoe would yet again be put on the witness stand for his own good. Delmont, however, still would not be, and another witness called her the complaining witness that never witnessed. Complaining witness meaning she's the one that initiated the entire trial and everything with her police charges. Anyway, this third trial would go from March 13th to April 12th of 1922. The jury deliberated for 5 minutes. When they returned, the verdict was acquittal, and the lead juror read the following prepared statement. "Acquittal is not enough for Roscoe Arbuckle. We feel that a great injustice has been done to him. There was not the slightest proof adduced to connect him in any way with the commission of a crime. He was manly throughout the case and told a straightforward story which we all believe. We wish him success and hope that the American people will take the judgment of 14 men and women that Roscoe Arbuckle is entirely innocent and free from all blame. And thus ended the trials of Roscoe Arbuckle. Now, let's contextualize this case just a little bit. Nothing has ever truly been proven, obviously. None of the witnesses could seem to decide what had actually happened. A lot of people are really ticked off about how Rapé had been treated in the trial, in the press, about talking how she's promiscuous, like victim blaming, even though the defense team had tried to prevent her reputation being damaged. They didn't really want that. There had to be some kind of explanation for the ruptured bladder, and they were hoping to prove that it could have been of natural causes, so some stuff about her reputation came into question, but obviously Hearst was wanting to sell as many papers as humanly possible, and so she was dragged through the mud to some degree. To a large degree. I have yet to find any evidence of the 5 abortions that she was said to have had between the ages of 16 and 26, which was when she passed away. I don't know, the victim-blaming nature that is present in a lot of such cases where women are attacked and they have to kind of prove that they weren't asking for it or whatever, which I'm not okay with. But something caused her bladder to rupture. I think the most likely thing that happened is that Roscoe Arbuckle and Virginia Rapé were kind of messing around in his hotel room, and because this was 1921, that wasn't something he wanted to get out. Or perhaps, or his initial story of her having this fit of sorts, hysterics and tearing off her clothes and saying she can't breathe, in the midst of the party was true, but he didn't want to use that story because it made her look bad. So either they were fooling around and he didn't want to admit that because it made him look bad, or he didn't want to continue with the story that she was tearing her clothes off in the middle of the party because it made her look bad. But either way, it was 1921, and people were really laser focused on Hollywood being this immoral thing, and hey, we can talk about that. Supposedly there was that rumor about Adolf Zucker trying to use this party because it was in the middle of Prohibition, so there's going to be booze. Maybe he's going to blackmail Arbuckle to get control over him, but then in this horrible coincidence, Virginia Rapé has this attack. There were doctors that said she suffered previously, like it was definitely an old condition of cystitis, which can lead to urinary retention, which can lead to a ruptured bladder, and peritonitis, which is the weakening of that lining, which can lead to rupture. And one of the symptoms is being unable to breathe, which is supposedly why she would tear her clothes off. She would drink, which would aggravate the peritonitis, so she would have the respiratory attack, and then she would tear her clothes off. And people were writing it off as her being just a wild party girl and she's promiscuous and whatever. And maybe she was promiscuous. It has nothing to do with what happened. And the only person that maintained the entire time that Rapé had put any blame on Arbuckle was the woman who left Rapé writhing in pain to telegram people about how she can possibly get money out of Roscoe Arbuckle. I guess really to sum it up, saying that Rapé was mistreated in the press and in the courtroom means absolutely that Arbuckle must be guilty is wrong. I don't know. Do not know, and no one really ever will. 1 week after Fatty Arbuckle was acquitted, the film industry installed William Harrison Hayes Sr. as an industry-wide censor, the president of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. He goes forward by banning Arbuckle from Hollywood and all showings of his films. He reverses this decision 8 months later, but the damage is done. Arbuckle's career is completely destroyed. He tries to act on stage and in vaudeville, but that doesn't pan out. He opens a club and hotel, but because of the depression, it shutters. He finalizes his divorce to Minta Durfee in 1925 and marries Doris Dean, but that marriage only lasted about a year. Both Minta and Doris cite desertion as reasons for their divorces. In 1931, Roscoe appeared in a fan magazine begging to be allowed back to Hollywood. He is offered a contract by his friend Hal Roach, but due to pressure from various women's groups, it falls through. He goes back to vaudeville and is finally given a contract by Vitaphone Industries by the studio head Sam Sachs to star in a 2-reel short. At some point, he does some film directing under the pseudonym William B. Goodrich after his father. The Vitaphone film is successful and he signs a contract to make 5 more as a continuing series. On June 21st, 1932, he marries Addie MacPhail, and they seem happy together. Things are finally starting to look up again for Roscoe Arbuckle. And on June 29, 1933, he signs a deal with Warner Brothers to make a full-length film. And that evening, he goes out to celebrate his first anniversary and his new contract, reportedly saying, "This is the best day of my life." That evening, he went to bed, suffered a heart attack, and died at the age of 46. In 1915, the Supreme Court had ruled that free speech did not extend to motion pictures in the ruling of Mutual Film Corporation versus Industrial Commission of Ohio. And this spurred decades of heavy censorship of Hollywood productions. And then along comes William Hayes in 1922 after the trials of Fatty Arbuckle. William Hayes was a Presbyterian elder, former head of the Republican National Convention, and the Postmaster General under President Warren G. Harding. He was morally invested in the content of films. In 1924, he introduced the formula, where studios and filmmakers would submit movie plots to the MPPDA, or Hayes office, for review and approval. In 1927, the list of don'ts and be carefuls, which I read at the beginning of this video, which was based on complaints by local censorship boards and was partially written by Jesuit priest Daniel A. Lord, came to be. The list was approved by the Federal Trade Commission, but there was no real way to implement or enforce it. In 1930, the Motion Picture Production Code is fully fleshed out, and in 1934, the MPPDA starts to rigidly enforce it with the help of Joseph Breen, who was an administrator for and appointed by Hayes. The code had definite religious and specifically Catholic undertones, and the influence of Catholicism was not openly admitted by the Hayes office for whatever reason. But the code opens with this. 1. No picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Hence the sympathy of the audience shall never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. 2. Correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be presented. 3. Law, divine, natural, or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation. In the 1950s, with the influence of foreign films and culture, the code was less and less enforced until it was finally replaced in 1968 by the Classification and Rating Administration, which is still in place today. That's why we have ratings on movies. G, PG, PG-13, etc. This system allowed the studios to produce whatever content in their films that they wished without fear of repercussions, and it put the onus of responsibility on the consumer for whether or not they would watch the films. That is the sordid, tragic tale of Roscoe Arbuckle and Virginia Rapé, and how the scandal brought about massive industry-wide censorship. That is all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed it, I guess. That is some cinema history for you. I'm truly not meaning for this to become a true crime channel, but so far, I've got 2 stories about people who were acquitted for murder and manslaughter. I mean, those are the interesting stories, but I definitely want it to still be about cinema. And I promise I will still be covering songs. I've just felt a little bit uninspired in that realm, but I'll be back at that, don't you worry. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, maybe give it a thumbs up down below, and Have a wonderful day. Bye. Publicity. Like coroner jury. That's great. Moving on. The jury deliberated for now today. Addie. William Hayes. Why can I not enunciate? There was no wheel. The MPP day. PP